Okay, yeah, let's begin. Yeah, hello everyone. We have a talk by Arpan and Abhishek on convex optimizations. Arpan, you can start.
Hi, I'm Arpin, and today I'll be giving a talk on convex optimizations. So I'll start with what mathematical optimization means. Mathematical optimization is a minimize or maximize the value of a function, which is called the objective function, uh, uh, subject to some constraints.
You're not sharing your screen.
These constraints. Oh, wait, I don't know what happened now.
Yeah, it's working.
I disconnected. Uh, yeah, so we try to minimize or maximize an objective function, which a function which is called the objective function, and we and the however the domain is subject is constrained by two types of constraints. One is the inequality constraints, which are FIs, where I ranges from 1 to some number m, and equality constraints called copies, will be any number. So this is the general optimization problem. Our problem can be minimization or maximization. However, we try to write it in form of minimization, and we try to FIs LHS with zero on to make the notation convenient. Uh, these functions. Yeah. So optimization, mathematical optimization is useful in several places. Since we are in computer science, we have only seen it mainly in stuff like machine learning. However, it is useful in many places like electronics, manufacturing, in industry, and several other places. Uh, so now I'll come to what a convex function is. However, I need to introduce you to convex sets. So convex sets are uh, uh, no, first I'll talk about affine sets. Affine sets are sets where if set for all sets A B belonging to S, uh, the element theta A plus 1 minus theta B must also belong to S. So this is called an affine set. Note that there's constraint on theta, so theta can be anything. And now geometrically, what a affine set implies is that given two points in the set, the entire line segment connecting them should also all the points on the line segment connecting them should also set. Uh, So this is an affine set. A convex set is a set where for A B belonging to S, theta A plus 1 minus theta B must belong to S. However, theta is constrained to 0 to 1. So what this essentially means geometrically is that all the points within the line segment of the set, within the line segment connecting to the 2 points in the set, lies in the set. So I'm giving you examples in R2. However, these can be generalized to any arbitrary sets. So in R2, what a convex set would look like is something like anything like which does not have which which is which does not have these kinds of things. So it's a bit difficult to say directly. So anything like this would be convex. Uh, however, this is not convex because this is non-convex because at 2 points lying at the ends of these of the uh, at these points do not allow the points in between to be present in the set, which is allowed here. So that is what convex sets are. Now I'll talk about affine functions and convex functions. So affine functions are functions uh, which follow this for which allow this. Where did I get my stylus? Uh, yeah, so so yeah, convex function is a function for which the epigraph of the function is convex. So what an epigraph means is that if a function is uh, so if a function in looks like this, then all the entire informally the entire area above it belongs to the is called the epigraph of the function. So all the points above the function, that is with a value higher than the function, lie in the epigraph of the function. This epigraph is a set, and a convex function is a function for which the epigraph of the function is a convex set. So uh, as you can see, anything like this would not be convex because this is not a convex set. As in, we although it is unbounded above, it is clear that it's not a convex set. Uh, Now, there are other equivalent definitions for convex set to define it more mathematically. So, the first, the main definition of the for convex set for convex function is this, where we say that f of theta x plus 1 minus theta y is less than equal to uh, theta f of x plus 1 minus theta f of y. So how we interpret this is something like this, where if this is if this is our function, and we take 2 points x and y on the on in the domain, uh, say this is x and this is y, this would be uh, f of x, and f of y. So uh, I should probably draw. Yeah. So if uh, this is x, this is y, this is f of x, and this is f of y. This level. Now what we mean by this is that uh, f of theta x plus 1 minus theta y, which means that a point lying somewhere here, somewhere in between x and y, the value of the function at this point would would be lesser. This value is this and would be lesser than the value at on this line segment corresponding to this value. So uh, I don't know how much I could explain it, but this is what it means geometrically. So this is what a this is the main definition of a convex function. Uh, Now the other equivalent definitions would be are these. So this is called the first order condition. Uh, Obviously, this is applicable only for differentiable sets. So this so basically, if you notice, f of x plus del f of x transpose into y by x would be is the first order approximation of the function f at point x. So and how you get that is through the Taylor series. So this is just the first term of the Taylor series expansion of f. Uh, Now, so what this means is that the first order approximation the first order approximation is always an underestimator of the function y. That is, uh, if I draw a function like this the tangent at any point would lie below the function. So I'll not go too deep into this. However, the one another important definition of a convex function is this. This is the Hessian of f is positive semi-definite. So what this means, so this is not this greater than equal to means positive semi-definite. So the Hessian of f, where h of ij is del 2x by sorry, del 2f by del xi del xj. This is the Hessian, and this Hessian should be positive semi-definite. Just to remind you, positive semi-definite would be is a matrix uh, such that if A is positive semi-definite, then x transpose ax is always greater than equal to 0 for all x. So this is the second order condition for for convex functions. Now we define convex optimization. Convex optimization problem is uh, so this was a general optimization problem. Here in convex optimization problem, uh, uh, any optimization problem is called a convex optimization problem when all the f's are convex and the h's are affine. That is, the objective and the inequality constraints are all convex functions, and inequality functions are all convex, and all the equality constraint functions h's are all affine. So this is how we define the convex optimization problem. So uh, let us talk about why convex optimization is important. So uh, why do we bother about convex optimization so much, and why study it separately is it should be clear from the one major property of convex functions. So the one property of convex functions is that if a point is locally optimal, then it is necessarily globally optimal. Now, uh, for convex functions, you have seen that uh, a point which is optimal, which that is all its neighborhood points are have values greater than it, that is the locally optimal point. So this is always the globally optimal point, which means that if we manage to find any locally optimal point, we can be sure that we have found the global optimum. uh, how this is helpful is pretty obvious, because when we try to solve a optimization problem, it is easier for us to find local optima, and this problem gets sufficiently difficult with non-convex problems. So that is the importance of convex functions. And note that it's not necessary for a convex function to have a unique minima, though, because this is convex, as in this is a line, if say. So all these points here are local optima, uh, and they are also the global optima. So a single solution for a convex function is not necessary, but uh, it is any local solution is a global solution. Also, duality holds better for convex functions. I mean, I haven't got into duality yet, and I am not too sure about like too well informed about to comment on this. But what I can say is that for dual functions, these it's easier to obtain the dual functions for convex functions, and it's a and some conditions like strong duality hold better for convex functions. I'll get to duality in a while. Now, however, in most real life problems, what you'll see is that most problems are non-convex. So why do we worry about convex optimizations again? The One of the reasons is that a non-convex function can be convexified. That is, uh, it can be converted into equivalent convex functions. So I haven't we in our course haven't got yet to convexification. So uh, I can't explain it in too detail. However, it is possible to convexify and get solutions for non-convex functions. Uh, and the second thing is that many non-convex functions can be estimated by convex functions. The solutions for many non-convex functions can be estimated by convex functions, and some bounds can be found on the solutions of non-convex functions. So yeah, so Abhishek will be solving a non-convex problem later, which is very interesting, and not a trivial problem, but using convex optimization we can find good bound on the problem. So any questions till now? Okay, so I'll move on. Uh, I am audible, right? I nobody knows talked in a while. So
Yeah, it's working. It's working.
okay. So now I'll you to a few tools for before we move on to the problem. First is the extended value function. So our functions are generally defined on some domains. So say our function is defined in a domain of A to B, and however, it is much easier for us to work with functions which are not defined on domains. So what we do is a neat trick, which is called extended value functions. So this is just for where we define a new function where the value of the function in the domain persists, and beyond that we just add infinity to the add infinity as the value of the function. So this is the extended value function, and uh, the reason it is useful is that if for a convex function, its extended value function is also convex. So this is at infinity. So it's hard to imagine how this is a convex function, but you can see it in form of an epigraph and see that uh, this is the this is a convex set. So the extend value function of a convex function is convex. Uh, Next, we'll go on to an example of a convex function. So this this is a very interesting example because it is not visible clearly that how at first glance how this would be a convex function. So first I'll show you how a pointwise maximum of convex functions is, or it's also convex. So what do I mean by pointwise maximum? So say I have convex functions like these. So if this is my convex function, so my pointwise maximum would be the maximum function at this point would be this. So our our pointwise maximum is this, and it is visible that this is a convex function. So this can be proved, and I mean also these functions have to be defined on an entire domain. So that's that. So this is this is one of the properties of a convex function. So if we combine take the pointwise maximum of several convex functions, then it is also convex. Now let f of x, now we try to prove that why if the prove that the sum of k largest elements of a vector, a function defined as the sum of k largest elements of a vector, is also convex. So this does not seem very trivial to us. Like, why would the sum of k largest elements of a vector be convex? So, like, how is it convex? It's first of all, it's not even differentiable that we go and do anything, and using the direct uh, convexity condition is also difficult. So how we will do it is using this pointwise maximum property. The first thing is that suppose we say that for just as an example, say this is a 5 sized vector and k is 3. So what we claim is that uh, x1 plus x2 plus x3, as in if these are the three largest elements, like these are the three largest elements, they like these are not indices of from here. So the sum of this is convex. So uh, notice that we can write this as something like our original vector, which is say x multiplied by x transpose say v. Now what is v? V is basically uh, uh, a vector which contains 1 at only 3 places. So out of 5 places, it contains 1 at only 3. Now, like, and now if we take a, uh, like, if we take V to be all possible V's, as in all 5C3 V's, then our function then basically what we are doing is that uh, we take a pointwise maximum of uh, x multiplied by vi transpose. So here goes from 1 to 5c3. So now see that x x vi sorry, this is x transpose vi. X transpose vi um, is just an affine function of this. So uh, another like all affine functions are certainly convex. I should have shown this earlier, but all affine functions are convex because they are less. They satisfy the less than equal to condition. So it's just a pointwise maximum of affine functions. Like yeah, so it's a pointwise maximum of uh, this all affine functions, that is all possibilities of x transpose vi. So we can prove without using any theorems that f is convex. uh, yeah, Abhishek will use this later for a proof. So now we move on to something called the Lagrangian. Now, notice that our previous objective function, a previous optimization problem, had constraints which had to be strictly satisfied. So, I need my x to be here. If I want an answer, I need my x to be to satisfy these two conditions strictly. Now, what a Lagrangian does is that uh, it adds to the objective function sum of the uh, yeah. So uh, Lagrangian is defined as x lambda nu and it's the sum of the objective function plus sum over I to m lambda I f fi x. So these are the inequality constraints, and these are the equality constraints. So the now notice that this is like now we define this to be as our new objective. We haven't done that yet, but if we do that, then what we are basically implying is that we are sort of penalizing our functions, penalizing ourselves for violating these constraints. But uh, but we are not completely ruling out the x if they violate these constraints. So say if f of I is also all lambda i's are greater than 0, greater than equal to 0, this is defined to be so. Uh, and so what allows us to do what help how it helps us if fi of x is great is does not if we do not satisfy the objective here, we will basically penalize ourselves with the value of lambda I. So it's like we incur a cost to ourselves. So um, so, like if you have had some familiarity with uh, neural networks or anything of the sort, then you will see that what we call as regularization in our neural network objective is nothing but this. We are basically penalizing ourselves for the functions being large. So uh, these are the this is the Lagrangian, and these are the variables lambda I and nu I. So these are vectors uh, which are size m and p respectively. Now we have defined a Lagrangian. Uh, we will talk about the Lagrangian dual function. Now the Lagrangian dual function is uh, g lambda nu, where we take an infimum of x over L x of the Lagrangian. So this is our Lagrangian dual function. Now what we have done basically is that we are trying to minimize uh, mi- uh, uh, take the infimum over x of this. Now how does this help us? We can prove that we can prove this property that uh, g of lambda nu is always less than equal to p star. So now what is p star? P star is our optimal function, optimal value for the original optimization problem. So say so if this was our original optimization problem, then uh, if we found an x star belonging to domain D, that is it satisfy these constraints and the value of f naught x star is minimum, this is called this is the p star. This is the value minimum, this is the final solution of our original problem, which which we will call the primal problem now. So this is the primal, and now we will define now basically what we want to establish is that the value of this function is always less than equal to p star. Now this is easily provable, so I will go ahead with the proof. Now see, notice from here that our g of lambda nu, say if so yeah, so if we find an x which belongs to h which belongs to the domain, so yeah, this is x belongs to D. Yeah, so if we find an x belonging to the domain, then we know for sure that all the fi's I greater than 0 all the inequality constraints are satisfied, which means that all the fi's are less than zero. Like for it to be satisfied, all the fi's should have been less than zero, and all the hi's were equal to zero. Now we can just write our that is this term completely disappears now in our G, and like what happens is that this is equal to f naught x. Suppose the x star is the in pointer for the infimum, then this is written as lambda I fi x star. And now we know that all these fi's are less than 0 and the lambda i's are greater than 0, which means that this term is always less than equal to 0, which means that our dual our Lagrangian dual function, uh, yeah, Lagrangian dual function is always less than equal to f naught x star, which is our optimal value p star. So this is the proof for the lower bound property. We will use these tools for a solution which Abhishek will discuss now. Which a solution for a problem which Abhishek will discuss now. I stopped sharing. Abhishek.
Hello. Am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's everything is working fine.
Okay. So now I'm going to discuss a problem which is actually non-convex, but we can still use convex optimization and try to solve it. So throughout this entire problem, I'm going to assume that a solver already exists for any kind of convex optimization problem, such that you give that solver your objective function, your inequality constraints, your equality constraints, and it will tell you like what is the optimal value and the solution to that problem. Now the problem statement is that you have n elements and you want to divide them into two groups where putting two elements in the same group will incur a cost. So let's say we have a matrix W. Let's say we have a matrix C, which where the I comma jth element will tell you how much cost do you have to pay for if you put ith element and the jth element in the same group. So if suppose your Cij, which is the I comma jth element of your C matrix, is quite high, you would want to put the ith element and the jth element preferably in the different groups. But at the same time, if it's pretty low, and in fact, if it's negative, then you would prefer that you keep them in the same group. So now our problem is that we want to find the optimal cost or the minimum cost that is going to get incurred for all the possible partitions that we can make in this. And we're going to start mathematically formulating this problem and then check if it's a convex optimization problem or not. So the steps to mathematically formulate any kind of optimization problem would be to first define the optimization variable of what are the feasible solution set, or what is the vector going to define, like what kind of partition, how is the vector going to define your partition, and etc. Then we'll define the objective function, the constraint functions, both the inequality and equality if they exist, and then we'll do a final mathematical formulation of it. So defining the optimization variable. So our variable x is going to be n dimensional, representing the n elements that are present in the set. So the ith component of the vector is basically telling us which group does the ith element belong to. So we can choose any two set of values to represent group 1 and group 2. You can either choose -1 and 1, or you could choose 0 and 1. Now we can choose any one of them, and we are going to consider our domain to be the n-dimensional n-dimensional real space. So now let's go to defining our optimization function. So our optimization function's input would be a vector x, which contains the information about the partition of how the groups have been divided into, what group, how the elements have been divided into which group, and our output would be a scalar value that tells us how much cost is incurred for this particular partition. So let us try to calculate that if we are given this vector x, how will we calculate the cost that is incurred? So for one element, if we see, we can write the cost incurred for one element as xi times summation from 1 to n of xj times cij. So here, if xi and xj are in the same group, then their signs will be the same. And if they are not in the same group, for example, here I'm going to take xi and xj to be either -1 or 1. So let's say I define my group 1, any element belonging to group 1 as -1, and any element that belongs to group 2 will have a value of 1. So in case if both of them are in the same group, the sign will remain the same and the cost gets added up. But in case they are not in the same group, then the cost gets subtracted. Now this subtraction of cost can be thought of as like it's a reward for not being in the same group or something like that. So if we see, the total cost would actually be half times this entire summation, because there's going to be, due to the symmetry, there's going to be a little bit of overcounting. And if I try to write it in the matrix notation, so this is how it's going to look. It's going to look like half x transpose cx, where c is the cost matrix. So I'm just going to write this half times c, and I'm going to group it together and write it as just w. And if you notice, this is nothing but a quadratic form. It is a quadratic form because, as we can see in this total over here, that each term here is a second degree term. Now, just to brush up on what quadratic forms are, let's say you have this particular expression, that is ax square plus 2bxy plus cy square. The relevant matrix notation for this would be xy transpose times this symmetric matrix times xy. Now we're going to define our constraint functions. So our constraint functions are going to tell us what are the feasible set, what is the set of feasible solutions. So here, since I've considered my group 1 to be represented as -1 and group 2 to be represented as 1, my constraint function, the only constraint function that I have is that my xi square should be 1, precisely. Like, there are many other ways in which you could have denoted your constraint function. You could have said mod x, mod of xi equals 1, but this is much more preferable, as you will see later, because this is kind of continuous and differentiable, and it is just useful, because if you try to do it in some other way, it gets a little bit messy. So I'm going to define my constraint function like this. Now the entire mathematical formulation of the problem is that I have to minimize this x transpose w times x, and this objective function is subject to constraints of xi square equals 1. Now let's discuss about the convexity of the objective function. Now, if you notice that a quadratic form is only convex if its Hessian is also convex, as was mentioned as a property. If the function is double differentiable, its Hessian has to be positive semi-definite for the entire function to be convex. So if you take out the Hessian of x transpose wx, we get w itself. We get actually 2w. So we can just say that if w is positive semi-definite, only then will our objective function be convex. But that depends on the properties of w, which we are unknown to. So for now, I'm just going to assume that it is non-convex and treat the entire objective function in terms of non-convexity. Now let's talk about the constraint functions. Now, as was mentioned as a condition of a convex optimization problem, is that our equality constraints have to be affine functions, it meaning that they have to be linear. But here, as we can see, our equality constraints are not linear. They're in fact non-linear. So this is not a convex optimization problem at all. It is actually purely non-convex. So there are two options in front of us now. We can either try to convexify this problem by some kind of manipulation, or we can actually use the lower bound property of the dual function to try to get an approximation, or try to extract some kind of information about what the actual optimal value would be. So since we can't convexify this anymore because the convexity of this completely depends on our W matrix. And even if we try to, change our constraints to somehow satisfy them to be affine, we can't say for sure whether our W would be a positive semi-definite matrix or not. So we're just going to assume that it is non-convex, and we'll try to find a lower bound now. So before I find the lower bound, now I'm going to find the dual function first of all through the Lagrange function. So the standard form of the Lagrange function is this L of x comma lambda comma nu. And if I try to now, uh, so fi of x and hi of x are respectively the inequality and the equality constraints. And in this problem, we have no inequality constraints, we have only equality constraints. So this lambda parameter can be taken away. And we have just this form now. And our dual function is defined as the infimum of this entire function over x. So this is our dual function. And let's try to solve this now and try to simplify this further. Now, over here, I have my g of mu to be infimum over x of this entire Lagrange function, where xi square minus 1 is the hi of x, basically. And I have assigned a Lagrange multiplier that is nu I to each one of those ith equality constraint. Now, since I can break this second term down and take the constant out, it's not, actually not a constant. Here minus 1 transpose v is nu is not a constant, but it is constant with respect to x. Just to mention that 1 transpose here, it just means a row vector which has all of its entries as 1. So basically here what was happening was I was summing up all the new i's because of this minus 1. So I just thought of writing it as a vector notation. Also, another manipulation that we are going to do is I'm going to sum up this second term over here can be rewritten like this. Now, what does diag of nu mean is if you have a vector x, which is, for example, let's say 1, 2, 3, then you can represent this diagonal matrix as 1, 0, 0, 0, 2, 0, and 0, 0, 3, which is nothing but all the diagonal entries will become the values of the x vector, and the remaining entries will be 0. Now that I've done the substitutions of whatever I had mentioned now, I can rewrite this. I can rewrite this by taking x transpose and x common out. So again, if you notice that this actually turns out to be a quadratic form. And again, its infimum over x will be decided based on whether this w plus diag of nu is actually positive semi-definite or not. So what I'm claiming is that if it is positive semi-definite, then the minimum value of this expression has to be 0. But if it is not positive semi-definite, then it would be minus infinity. So the proof is that let's say there is a matrix A which is not positive semi-definite. Then there is some certain x. So it means that there is some particular value of x for which x transpose ax is lesser than 0. So let me say that I'm going to choose such an x whose x transpose ax makes it a negative value, where a is some finite negative number. Now I'm just going to multiply both the sides with a positive constant k square, and I'm going to distribute this k to one x over here and the other x over here. And the inequality remains unchanged because it's a positive constant. And I'll just take k to infinity now. So if I just take k to infinity, this entire thing becomes, the entire minimum of this problem becomes minus infinity, hence proof that the minimum value is minus infinity. uh, G of nu can now be defined as minus 1 transpose of nu when W plus diag of nu is 0. I'm sorry, W plus diag of nu is positive semi-definite. Otherwise, it is minus infinity. Now, the basic property of positive semi-definite was if it is positive semi-definite, then its minimum value has to be 0, or at least its minimum value would be something greater than 0. So in case it is 0, then the entire function would become just minus 1 transpose times nu. So now that I've simplified my function, I'm going to use the property of lower bound to find a relationship between this dual function and the optimal value of the original function that we had. So from the lower bound property, I know that my g of lambda comma nu has to be less than the optimal value, which is p star. If lambda is greater than 0, where this inequality represents component wise inequality, lambda 1, lambda 2, everything is greater than 0, and p star is the optimal value of the objective function. But since there is no lambda in my problem, I don't have any constraints over here. I can just take any value of nu which satisfies the domain that I just found out, and just say that uh, this is going to be less than the optimal value. But now, to get as close to the optimal value as possible, I would like to maximize my dual function, that is this g of lambda, g of just nu now. So maximizing this would imply that I'm actually minimizing my minus g of nu. So all the maximas in this g of nu would actually become minimas when I take its negative. And if we notice, minus g of nu is actually 1 transpose nu when nu satisfies this property. Otherwise, it is infinity. And if you observe closely, this is actually a convex problem. So this is actually a clear convex optimization problem which needs to be minimized, because now if I just find out the minimum value of this, I can just take its negative, and that would become the maximum value of g of nu. And since I've already assumed in the starting that I have a solver to which if I give any kind of convex optimization problem, it would give me an answer. I can just dump it in the solver and get the maximum lower bound. Now, I'll just try proving that why this minus g of nu is convex. So first of all, I'm going to prove that first of all, for any function to be convex, the domain over which it is defined also has to be convex. So I'm going to take two such points, x and y, and assume that they satisfy the condition of the convex domain. That is, w plus diag of x is also positive semi-definite, and w plus diag of y is also positive semi-definite. Now, using the convexity condition, any point in between them, between x and y, should also satisfy this condition. So if they satisfy, then this set is indeed convex. And if I take theta x plus 1 minus theta y under the constraints that theta belongs to 0 and 1, I can rearrange this and I get a linear combination of the positive semi-definite matrices. And this again is a positive semi-definite matrix. So hence, any point between x and y also lies in the set, also satisfies this condition that the w plus diag of x is positive semi-definite. So my domain is domain satisfies the convex set property. Now let me prove the convex function satisfies this property. So I'm going to prove it using two methods. The first method would be to take the gradient and then the Hessian. So if I take the gradient, then gradient of minus g of nu actually turns out to be a column vector with all of its entries 1, because each one of the g minus g of nu depends on a linear function of nu I, the ith component of nu. And if I take its Hessian, then I get directly 0. And this is indeed positive semi-definite. The other method is by using the property that Arpan had just discussed, that if the sum of r largest components of a vector is also a convex function. So all I need to do is just substitute r to be equal to n, and hence it is a convex function. So these two methods prove that this is a convex function. Also, if you notice in our problem, we have this infinity otherwise, meaning that if our nu does not lie in the domain, then the function is infinity. It assumes a value of infinity. But I know that from the extended value theorem, I can do this for any kind of convex function. So this function that I have, g minus g of nu, it is perfectly convex. Now I want to discuss that, is this dual function like always concave? Because if minus g of nu was convex, it implies that my g of nu was actually convex. I'm sorry, if my minus g of nu was convex, it implies that my g of nu was actually concave. So it is actually not a coincidence. There is a decent proof to it. it is, so the proof goes on like this. So I'm going to write my g of nu again. And if I notice that this is nothing but the pointwise infimum of a family of functions. So I if I notice my g of, I should have written g of lambda comma nu here. So if I notice that this function only depends on the values of lambda and nu, and if I notice over here all the components of lambda and all the components of nu, they are all linear functions, and not actually linear, they're actually affine functions of they're actually affine. There is no non-linear term present in that. So I'm basically taking a positive pointwise infimum of a family of an affine functions, and hence this is a concave function, because let me just show you once. uh, so now imagine I take a lot of lines, and this is the family of affine functions that I was talking about. And if I try to take the pointwise infimum of all of these lines, then what I basically get is this concave function. So this was the geometric interpretation of why g of lambda comma nu is uh, why, sorry, g of lambda comma nu is a concave function. Now I want to give a, I want to take a random lower bound and try to give some sort of idea of how large this optimal value is. So before I take any kind of new, which will then give me, which will then give me a lower bound, I want to first take such new that will satisfy this condition, that is w plus diag of nu is positive semi-definite. Because if it doesn't satisfy this condition, then the only value that I get out of g of nu is infinity, minus infinity, sorry. And this is not a good lower bound. So I would try to choose my new such that it satisfies this particular condition. So out of the blue, I take this new, which is minus lambda min of the W matrix times the times one, where one is a column vector with all of its entries as one. And now I have to prove that if it satisfies this condition, then I get a decent answer. I get a reasonable lower bound. So if I just prove that this satisfies this condition, now I'm going to use this property, which is true only for symmetric matrices, that the minimum eigenvalue of a symmetric matrix, lambda min here actually stands for the minimum eigenvalue, sorry. So I know that the minimum eigenvalue of a symmetric matrix is the infimum of x transpose ax divided by x transpose x, the norm of x, over all possible x, where x is obviously not 0. Now I just have to prove that W minus lambda min of this I, lambda min of the identity matrix, is positive semi-definite. So to prove any kind of matrix which is positive semi-definite, all I have to prove that x transpose times this matrix times x is greater than or equal to 0 for all x. So if we do some kind of rearranging, we end up with this, that the x transpose wx is actually greater than lambda min of the norm squared. And from this I get lambda min is x transpose wx divided by the norm square. And this is actually a known property, so that my assumption that w minus lambda min was actually positive semi-definite at this step is actually true. So it satisfies this condition, and so my g of nu would now be minus 1 transpose times the minus lambda min of w of the one vector. And it's basically adding up all the lambda mins, because each component of nu is lambda min, so all the lambda mins get added up. And this gives me that my p star, which is the optimal value, is strictly is greater than or equal to n lambda min. So this was my demonstration of how convex optimization tools and techniques can be used to not completely solve a non-convex problem, but at least help us in approximating on what the optimal value is going to look like. Uh, So this was the entire point of this seminar. But there is one more thing that I want to share. Uh, this was actually a very vague idea that came to my mind, but I still want to share it. So what I thought was, um, if I try to modify my new constraints and I write summation of I equals 1 to n, xi square equals n, if this has to be satisfied. Now, if you notice that these constraints are loose, they're not as tight as our previous constraints, because in our previous constraints, xi was solely limited to 1 or minus 1. But as I define these new constraints, my xi's could also take decimal values. So these are loose constraints, but one added advantage that they bring along is I can easily represent them as x transpose x equals n. Now, the reason for me doing this is, we already know that a lot of convex optimization solvers exist, but just sometimes just approximating the solution using convex optimization tools for non-convex functions is not enough. We might need some exact solutions. So there are many algorithms that are being developed recently for trying to solve non-convex optimization problems. Uh, Special classes, not all of them. None of the algorithms are you know very efficient in solving in general any kind of non-convex function, but there for certain classes of non-convex functions there are specific algorithms are being developed. So the reason for me doing this was, there is a specific algorithm for solving a quadratic objective function constrained with a constrained norm, that the norm is fixed. And we can directly dump this problem into that and try to get the optimal solution and the optimal value. Now, what I thought of was that if we try to round about, let's say, the optimal value that this quadratic minimizer with norm constraint gives us, this could actually be a better lower bound to our original problem. Also, if we have to find the optimal solution, we can just round about each of these components or each of these xi components to their respective group numbers, and maybe that would give us an optimal solution. I'm not sure of it though. It was just a vague thought that came to my head. This is obviously open to discussion. So thank you so much for attending. This was all I had from my side.
Yeah, thanks Abhishek and Arpan. Are there any questions? Yeah, if not, I'm going to stop the recording now.